Let's see. All right, 1 o'clock. Time for English literature. It's Tuesday, March 7th. We're going to continue studying Homer's Iliad, kind of getting really into the story today. I'll provide some review, so we'll go back and talk about what we've covered so far, but we're going to really start getting into things. And I think I mentioned in one of our first meetings that we're going to start off very slowly because we've got a lot of background material to get into and explain. But then as we get going, once we get through this background material and we get comfortable with this reading, the pace is going to pick up and we'll get through more and more each meeting. And my desire for this class is, by going through this together, I can take away all of the confusing stuff in the reading and allow you to get these English literature assignments done really easily, I think, and get you through these courses as helpfully as possible. So just to make sure, give me a wave if you can hear me okay, just so I know everybody can hear me. Good, thank you. Okay, so this is the third class we've had in Homer. The first one I just talked about why Homer is good to study, and again that's recorded. You can watch that if you didn't see it. In the second class, we got into last week's class. We got into what the problem is in this story, what happens that causes the trouble, because we read about there being a plague that breaks out and punishes the Greek soldiers. We talked about what the cause of that plague was. We said that when the Greeks were fighting, they were taken captives, and among those captives was a certain girl, and that girl turned out to be the daughter of one of the priests of Apollo. And obviously she's not the kind of person who should be taken captive, and so her father came, who was a priest of Apollo, and he came to ask the Greeks to let her free, and he was willing to pay a great ransom to buy her freedom. And Agamemnon, the leader of the Greeks, chose to treat him disrespectfully and reject his request, which was just, not merciful and was very selfish and prideful. And then the priest went away upset, and he prayed to Apollo that Apollo would pay back Agamemnon for this evil that he had done. So we learned in the last lesson what the cause of the problem was that caused the Greeks to suffer. Because you have to remember, in this story, the Greeks are the good guys. The Trojans were the bad guys. They started the whole problem. Paris, the prince of Troy, stole the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. They started the trouble. They could have ended it, and they chose not to. And so the Greeks went to right this wrong. And so the Greeks are the good guys in this fight. They should be the ones we expect to win, but suddenly we find a plague breaking out. And for the Greeks, they understood that a plague can't break out unless the gods allow it. So why in the world would they be allowing a plague to destroy the Greek armies when they're the good guys? And now we learn why that plague happened, because of how Agamemnon treated Chryses, who was a priest of Apollo. So today what we're going to do is pick up at that point in the story. We're going to pick up with what happens after Chryses prays to Apollo, and how this plague begins. So we're going to read through this together. I'll read it so I can help you to hear and listen to the poetry of it, because that takes a little bit of experience, and we'll just try to get through as much as we can. And anytime I run into something that I think you might not understand or might be worth talking about, I'll stop and explain it. All right, so you guys can just relax and follow along. And remember, the goal of this class is to just become familiar with the story and learn to understand the story so that you can complete these assignments and get this English literature course done, okay? So I'll do the work. You guys just pay attention and follow along. If you have any questions, we'll stop. Either I'll stop somewhere along as we go, or we'll just wait until the end and take some time for any questions. So if questions pop up along the way, what does this mean? Anything like that, just keep a list of your questions, and we'll answer them later on. So here we go. So Chryses prayed. Let me share my screen so you can see the text here. We're starting right here. This is book 1, just the second or third page into the book. So we see Chryses just finished his prayer to Apollo after he left Agamemnon, and we pick up the story after he finishes his prayer. Okay. Chryses is the priest. Thus Chryses prayed, the favoring power attends, and from Olympus lofty tops descends. Thus Chryses prayed, the favoring power attends, and from Olympus lofty tops descends. So Chryses prays, and then it says, the favoring power attends. What that means is the God hears his prayer. The favoring power, the power that favors Chryses, attends. To attend means to listen to or pay attention to. So Chryses prays, and his prayer is heard, and from Olympus's lofty tops, he descends. So from the top of Mount Olympus was a great mountain in ancient Greece, and it's so high and it goes up into the clouds. You can imagine like the clouds cover the top of the mountain. And the Greeks saw that as sort of like the place where the gods dwell in their mythology, okay? From Olympus's lofty tops, he descends. So the god Apollo comes down from Mount Olympus. Bent was his bow. Bent was his bow. In other words, he had drawn his bow and had his arrow ready to fire. So he was angry. Bent was his bow, the Grecian hearts to wound. Grecian just means Greek. So he comes down from Mount Olympus, ready to act, angry because of this prayer of his priest, with his bow bent, ready to punish the Greeks. Fierce as he moved, his silver shafts resound. In other words, he's carrying a quiver with his arrows, and his arrows are made of silver. His silver shafts resound. Breathing revenge, a sudden night he spread, and gloomy darkness rolled about his head. The fleet in view, so the fleet of Greek ships, the fleet in view, he twanged his deadly bow. He shot his arrow. He twanged his deadly bow, and hissing fly the feathered fates below. So his arrow flies, the arrows have feathers on them. And we've got this interesting phrase, the feathered fates below. So when he fires his arrow, this feathered arrow flies, and it brings with it this punishment. And so it's sort of the will of the gods coming to punish them. And the arrow is sort of a symbol of their fate. So it says the feathered fates. That's how it refers to this arrow. So again, you want to talk about figurative language and things like that. We'll talk about that later. We'll take some time, but you can see these examples, okay? So the god Apollo comes down from Mount Olympus, angry because of the prayer of the priest. He's got his quiver on his back with his arrows made of silver. His bow is bent. In other words, he's ready to shoot, and he lets this arrow fly, this arrow of punishment. Hissing flies the feathered fates. On mules and dogs, the infection first began. So the plague begins. Mules and dogs, animals begin to get sick. And last, the vengeful arrows fixed in man. So this plague spreads first among the animals and then among men. Now notice the question in your assessment will be something like, what does this lesson teach us about Greek religion? Or what does this lesson teach us about natural philosophy? Well, what does this lesson teach us about the origin of diseases in the world? You can see that in the Greek mindset, diseases aren't just, oh, I touched a dirty spoon and some bacteria got into my body and made me sick. So now I just need some medicine. And if I take the medicine, it'll kill the bacteria. That's not how Greek people thought. When something terrible happened, the Greeks understood it to be only possible because the gods allowed it or did it. And so it's teaching us how the Greeks look at the world, at the natural world, that they see religion and nature tied together. So you can never understand natural events without understanding religion. On mules and dogs, the infection first began, and last, the vengeful arrows fixed in man. For 9 long nights through all the dusky air, the pyres, that means fires that are burning to burn dead bodies. Okay, so people are dying and they're burning their bodies. That's what a pyre is. That's the Greek word for fire, but we're talking about funeral fires that are used to burn up dead animals and dead things to get rid of this disease. The pyres, thick flaming, shot a dismal glare, but ere the 10th revolving day was run, inspired by Juno, Thetis's godlike son convened to counsel all the Grecian train. So what we learn here is this plague started. Apollo unleashed this plague upon the Greek people, and it lasted for 9 days. So there's 9 days where everything just goes crazy. Animals are dying, people are getting sick, people are dying. And on the 10th day, the Greeks respond and they realize that something serious is going on. So what we read here is, before, that's what ere means before, but ere the 10th revolving day was run, before, on the 10th day, inspired by Juno. Juno is seen as one of these goddesses. So Juno actually causes one of the Greeks to think and act. She inspires someone to do something. Who does she inspire? Thetis's godlike son. Who is Thetis's godlike son? That's Achilles. Okay, so Thetis is another goddess, and she is believed, and again, this is in Greek mythology, she is believed to be the mother of Achilles, this great warrior that we read about in the Iliad. So her son, who this says is, it says is godlike. He's like a god. In other words, he's almost greater than his fellow men. He's godlike. He receives this inspiration from Juno, or from from the spirits. He receives this inspiration, Achilles, and he convenes to council. He calls together all of the Grecian train, all the Greek army. He calls them together. For much the goddess mourned her heroes slain. The assembly seated, rising o'er the rest, Achilles, thus the king of men addressed. The king of men is Agamemnon. So Achilles calls everyone together, and he stands up and speaks to all the Greek armies. It says he speaks to the king of men. So he's talking to Agamemnon, inspired by Juno. So we see that Apollo unleashes this punishment, but Juno, the goddess, she actually favors the Greeks and wants to help them. So she inspires Achilles to go do something, and he calls together this council and speaks to the people. So this is Achilles speaking to all the Greeks and to Agamemnon, who's there. He's the king of men. Achilles says, "Why leave we not the fatal Trojan shore and measure back the seas we crossed before?" So Achilles says, let's get out of here. Let's get back into our ships and go back to where we came from, because obviously this situation is not blessed. We're being punished here for some reason. Why leave we not the fatal Trojan shore and measure back the seas we crossed before? The plague destroying whom the sword would spare. Here are the soldiers who survive these battles. We've been victorious in battles, and now the plague destroys us. So there's no way for us to win. Even if we win the war, even if we win these battles, the gods are going to destroy us with plagues. So obviously this is an impossible pursuit that we're working for here. The plague is destroying those whom the sword would spare. It is time to save the few remains of war. And let's get out of here, he says. At least let's save our lives, because it's clear the gods are against us. But then he says this, but let some prophet or some sacred sage explore the cause of great Apollo's rage, or learn the wasteful vengeance to remove by mystic dreams, for dreams descend from Jove. Okay, so here is Achilles' speech. And again, we're going through this very slowly, because as you get started with this literature, there's just a lot you have to learn, but it'll get easier as we go. Achilles speaks to the Greeks, inspired by Juno, and he says, look, we won the battles, we've overcome the danger of the sword, and yet here we are being punished by plagues. So obviously the gods are against us. And he identifies Apollo as the cause of this. He says, you know what? Let's get out of here. Let's get back on the ships and go home, because obviously this is not blessed by the gods. But then he says, or, here's another option, or let some prophet or sacred sage, let some religious wise man or prophet explain to us what's causing this plague, so that maybe we can do something to, gain back the gods' favor and have this plague come to an end. So Achilles says we have to do one of two things. We either need to turn around and go home, or we need to figure out why Apollo is punishing us so we can do something about it and regain his favor, so this plague can end and we can move forward. So one of these two things is necessary. Let some prophet or some sacred sage, sage means wise man, explore the cause of great Apollo's rage, or learn how the wasteful vengeance to remove, how to take this plague away by mystic dreams, for dreams descend from Jove. Here we have another example of what does this lesson teach us about religion, right? The gods communicate to men through dreams. We saw Juno inspired Achilles to do this. So we see, as we go, we see more and more information about how the Greeks view religion. So let's try to figure out what the cause of this plague is. Let some wise man who communicates with the gods, or with whom the gods communicates, let them explain to us what's the cause of this plague. That's what Achilles calls for. He goes on to say, if someone has broken vows that they made to God, if broken vows this heavy curse have laid, then let altars smoke. Then let us make sacrifices. Let the altars smoke, and hecatombs be paid. Hecatombs are animal sacrifices. So if someone has broken a vow that they made to the gods, and now the gods are punishing us because vows have been broken, well, then let us make sacrifices and make up for this. Let's do penance for sinning by breaking our vows. And so heaven, being atoned or satisfied by our sacrifices, shall dying Greece restore. And Phoebus, that's another name for Apollo, Phoebus will dart his burning shafts no more. So if there's some sin among us, someone has done something evil that has made the gods angry, let us know so we can make sacrifices and atone for our sins. And again, here's another example. What does this teach us about Greek religion? The Greeks believe that if men do evil things, the gods are angered and the gods punish them. And then men need to offer sacrifices as penance to the gods to end these punishments. Okay, so we're learning a lot about Greek religion here, and it's very clear how their religion works. They don't necessarily know the gods don't reveal themselves, but the Greeks think about the gods based on what they experience. And so, as I said in the first lesson, some Christians will say, we shouldn't read this stuff. They're talking about false gods and all this. This is 750 years before Christianity. And what we see are men are living in the world. They're paying attention to their experiences and they're interpreting their experiences, and their experiences are leading them to draw conclusions about how the gods work and how things work in human life. When a plague breaks out, obviously something is wrong. There's no natural explanation for this. Something is wrong. Maybe the gods are angry because somebody did something, and maybe there's a way that we can say we're sorry and make up for it, and the gods will relax and we can have peace again. And that's just reasoning based on experience. So there's nothing evil about that. And that's actually a part of true religion. We believe the same thing. We believe that if you sin as a Catholic person, if you sin against God and against your neighbor, God becomes angry with us. Our neighbors become angry with us. And God's blessing may be taken away from our lives. And we've got to confess our sins. We've got to make up for things we've done wrong with the people that we've done wrong to. So if I steal something from you, I'm not allowed to just keep on doing I've got to repay you for what I've stolen, and I've got to confess my sin, and I've got to do penance with the hope that my relationship to God will be restored if I respond to my sin rightly. So what the Greeks are teaching here, of course, it's not perfect. It's 700 years, or remember, Homer is telling us about the Trojan War. So that's 1200 years before Christianity. So is this true religion? No, of course not. True religion hasn't even been revealed yet in history. But is this pretty accurate in terms of interpreting how human sins anger God and require us to do penance? Yes, that part of it is accurate. So we're learning a lot about Greek religion from what we're reading here. Okay, so Achilles wants to know, what can we do? How can we bring an end to this plague? Remember, he asked for some prophet or sacred sage, some wise man, to explain what's going on. Well, here, one of these prophets, a man named Calchas, stands up to answer Achilles. So Achilles said and sat when Calchas thus replied. Calchas the wise, okay, he's a sage, he's a wise man. The Grecian priest, he's sacred, he's a priest. The Grecian priest and guide, the sacred seer, whose comprehensive view the past, the present, and the future knew. So this man Calchas is a wise man, he's a seer, he's a prophet. And it says that he knew the past, the present, and the future. Uprising slow, so he stands up slowly because he's probably an old man. Remember, we talked about this in Aesop's Fables yesterday, why being old is significant, because it's experienced, right? Uprising slow, the venerable, that means respectable. That's what the word reverend means. When we say Reverend Smith in the church, we talk about a priest or a bishop as a reverend or a deacon. Venerable, respectable, sage, thus spoke the prudence and fears of age. So this prophet stands up to respond to Achilles. He says, Achilles, beloved of Jove. And remember, Jove is just another name for Jupiter. Beloved of Jove, Achilles, wouldst thou know why angry Phoebus bends his fatal bow? First give thy faith and plight a prince's word of sure protection by thy power and sword. So what Calchas says is, before I say anything, Achilles, I want you to make me a promise. I want you to promise me before I say anything that you will protect me. So what I'm about to say will put my life in danger. And what I ask is that you promise me that you will protect me so I can say what needs to be said and I don't have to fear being attacked for it. So that's what he means when he says, first give thy faith. That means give me your word, give me a promise, promise me. First give thy faith and plight a prince's word, promise your word. So Achilles is a prince, meaning he's a leader of the people. Promise me sure protection by thy power and sword. So first, assure that I'll be safe if I answer this question, because I'm going to get myself into trouble here. And that's what a prophet is. If you want to know what is a prophet is a person who doesn't have political power. A prophet is a person who doesn't have power and doesn't want political power, and he speaks the truth at the cost of his own life. That's really what a prophet is. A person in society who is willing to speak the truth at the expense of his own life, and he usually doesn't have political power. So if we think about prophets in the Bible, we think about John the Baptist. What happened to John the Baptist? He spoke against the king and got himself put to death, right? Jesus was a prophet. What happened to Jesus? He spoke against the religious leaders in Israel and got himself crucified. And if we go back through history, the prophets were usually martyrs who ended up getting killed. So God reveals things to the prophets, and he gives them special graces, special courage that makes them fearless, and they end up usually suffering death for the sake of the truth. That's what a prophet is. So Calchas asks Achilles to promise that he'll protect him. And he says, because I must speak what wisdom would conceal. So if I was smart, I wouldn't reveal what I'm about to reveal. And the only way that I'm willing to reveal it, Achilles, is if you promise to protect me. Because my wisdom would normally tell me to keep this quiet, but I'm going to say it. I must speak what wisdom would conceal. And truths invidious to the great, truths that the great will be offended by, truths invidious to the great reveal. Bold is the task when subjects, that means lower class people in society, when subjects grown too wise instruct a monarch where his error lies. And remember, what led Agamemnon to disrespect the priest was kingly pride. So Agamemnon's a dangerous dude. He's a prideful king. And Calchas is saying, what I'm about to say is the kind of thing that makes monarchs angry and gets people like me put to death. Therefore, I ask Achilles that you promise to protect me. Instruct a monarch where his error lies, for though we deem the short-lived fury past, 'tis sure the mighty will revenge at last. So this plague calms down and there's a little bit of relief, but Calchas says we can be sure that it's going to continue unless this problem is solved. So then Pelides, who in the world is Pelides? Pelides is the son of Peleus, that's Achilles. So Pelides responds and says, from thy inmost soul, speak what thou knowest and speak without control. Even by that God, I swear, who rules the day, to whom thy hands the vows of Greece convey, and whose blessed oracles thy lips declare, long as Achilles breathes this vital air, no daring Greek of all the numerous band against his priest shall lift an impious hand. Not even the chief by whom our hosts are led, the King of kings, shall touch your sacred head. So there we have Achilles' promise to Calchas that he will keep him safe. So he's free to speak, okay? And just remember, just as Agamemnon is referred to as Atrides, which means son of Atreus, Achilles is referred to Pelides or Pelides, which means son of Peleus. So that's another name for Achilles. So Calchas stands up He says, he says, I'll talk if I'm promised protection. Achilles promises to protect him, so he's safe. Encouraged thus, the blameless man replies. So Calchas speaks. Nor vows unpaid, nor slighted sacrifice, but he, our chief, provoked the raging pest. So Calchas tells Achilles and all the Greeks that we are not being punished because someone in the Greek army has sinned or broken any vows. Calchas says, he, our chief, that is Agamemnon, he provoked the raging pest, the pestilence, the plague. He did it. Agamemnon did it. Apollo's vengeance for his injured priest. Nor will the gods' awakened fury cease. This is not going to stop. But plagues shall spread, and funeral fires increase, until the great king, without any ransom paid, to her own Chrysa send the black-eyed maid. Perhaps with added sacrifice and prayer, the priest may pardon, and the god may spare. So this is Calchas's answer. Calchas reveals the cause of this plague. He says, it's not because any Greek soldier did anything wrong, it's because our king did something wrong. He provoked this raging pest by injuring Apollo's priest. And there's nothing we're going to do about it. There's no way that we can solve it until the great king, with no ransom from the priest, he does not have to pay anything. Agamemnon should return the girl, that is the black-eyed maid. A maid is a virgin, a young girl. Agamemnon should return her to her father and accept no ransom for her. The priest doesn't owe him anything. And if he doesn't do this, this plague will never end. But perhaps with added sacrifice and prayer, the priest may pardon us and the god may spare. So we see more again about religion in ancient Greece. The priest stands as a representative of the god. If you offend the priest, you offend the god, and the god acts to avenge the wrong done to the priest. If the priest pardons you, the god will spare. And we see that this is what we teach in the Catholic Church. The priest stands as a representative of God. If you sin not only against God, not only against your neighbor, but against the church. Therefore, we go to the priest to confess our sins and to offer to do penance. The priest pardons us, and the priest could choose not to pardon us if he doesn't think we're serious. The priest represents God. The priest chooses to pardon us, and then we can be sure that when the priest pardons us, God himself spares and pardons us in the priest and through the priest. So we can see this idea of sin, of penance, and of forgiveness was known to the Greeks and understood as sort of the basic foundation of religion. And that's all a good thing, because that same foundation is true in the Christian faith. Okay, so there's the answer to the question. It's Agamemnon's fault. He took the priest's daughter, and until he returns that daughter to her father, the trouble is never going to stop. That's Calchas's answer to Achilles. The prophet spoke, and when with a gloomy frown, the monarch, Agamemnon, started from his shining throne. Black choler filled his breast that boiled with ire. This is an important line here. What does this lesson teach us about natural philosophy? What does this lesson teach us about natural philosophy? Let me explain something about how in the ancient world, the body was understood. And I'm not an expert at this, but I can explain it enough to help you understand what it's talking about here. In the ancient world, they thought about the body very differently than we do today. What they believed about the body was that there were 4 basic fluids in the body. I don't even know if I can name them off the top of my head right now. But they taught that there were 4 basic fluids in the body, and that everyone had a different balance of these 4 fluids. And the balance of these 4 fluids determined a person's personality. You might have heard of people talk about the 4 temperaments. Maybe your parents know about that. The 4 temperaments are 4 different kinds of personalities. And those 4 different kinds of personalities are based upon these 4 different fluids in the body. Some people have more of one, some people have more of another, and that's what causes them to act and behave the way that they do. They're different personalities. And what physicians would do in the ancient world, physicians would try to learn about the fluid levels in the people's bodies, and they would carry out different remedies that would adjust those levels and try to bring the people back into balance, which is what they consider to be good health, even for peace of mind. So it wasn't just your body, it was also your mind and your soul. They all were affected by these 4 fluids. They were called humors, H-U-M-O-U-R-S, humors. So when it tells us that the monarch heard this message from Calchas, and then it says, black collar filled his breast. It's talking about one of these fluids rising up in him and filling him with an angry spirit. Black collar filled his breast that boiled with ire. Ire means anger. And so you've got this figure of speech that anger is like a boiling inside of us. Okay, like, and we use this phrase in English, we say his blood boiled, right? To talk about anger. Black collar filled his breast that boiled with ire, and from his eyeballs flashed the living fire. So Agamemnon was provoked to wrath because he's called out by this prophet and said to be the cause of this plague. From his eyeballs flashed living fire. So Agamemnon now speaks, angry at Calchas. He says, augur accursed. And augur is another word for prophet or seer, okay, a religious prophet, augur. Augur accursed, denouncing mischief still, prophet of plagues, forever boding ill. You're always giving us bad messages. Still must that tongue some wounding message bring, and still thy priestly pride provoke thy king. For this are Phoebus's oracles explored, to teach the Greeks to murmur at their lord. So Agamemnon accuses this prophet of just always leading the people against their ruler. He accuses him of just always having bad things to say about the king. He studies Phoebus's oracles only so that he can teach the Greeks to murmur or complain against their lord, their king. So Agamemnon doesn't like Calchas. The kings never like prophets because prophets always stand against kings to keep them in check. Agamemnon continues and says, this with falsehood is my honor stained, is heaven offended and a priest profaned, because my prize, my beauteous maid I hold, and heavenly charms prefer to proffered gold, because I keep this woman who's my just reward as a spoil of a victorious battle. Is that evil? That's not evil. I'm allowed to keep rewards from war as a king. I'm not doing anything wrong. A maid unmatched in manners as in face. So she's just as good as she is beautiful. She's got good manners and a beautiful face. Skilled in each art and crowned with every grace. You know, this beautiful, wonderful, skilled girl. Am I unjust that I want to keep her after winning in battle and rightly taking her as a captive? I'm not doing anything wrong. He then says, not half so dear were Clytemnestra's charms, when first her blooming beauties blessed my arms. So Clytemnestra, this name here, Clytemnestra, that's Agamemnon's wife. She's the queen of Argos. And Agamemnon says, my wife Clytemnestra, as beautiful and wonderful as she wasn't half as good as this girl. So am I unjust to desire to keep her? My wife wasn't even as good as this. And you could say, boy, that's not a very nice thing to say about your wife, right? Well, you should know this story. When Agamemnon gets home from war, Clytemnestra kills him. So you don't have to worry about Clytemnestra being offended here, because she ends up killing Agamemnon when he comes home. That's actually the story of a play written by the ancient Greeks, a play titled Agamemnon. He goes home after the war. His wife welcomes him home. He gets set up. You imagine coming home from war. Obviously, you're tired and exhausted, and it's been years away from home. He gets set up to take a bath when he gets home, and while he's in the bathtub, his wife kills him. So Clytemnestra is obviously insulted here by Agamemnon, but she takes revenge later on. He says, this captive girl, she's twice as beautiful and good as my wife was when I first met her, and her blooming beauties blessed my arms. In other words, I held her. And this girl is twice as good as she is. Yet, however, as much as I have the right to keep a captive, and as beautiful and as good and valuable as she is to me, yet, Agamemnon says, if the gods demand her, let her leave, let her sail. So if the gods truly demand that I return her, let her sail. She's free to go. Our cares are only for the public weal. Our cares, Agamemnon refers to himself as plural, as our. That's called the royal plural, where a king refers to himself as we, because he speaks about himself and all of his people with him. Our cares are only for the public weal. That means the common good. All I care about is my people. So if I do have to give her up, if the gods require this, she's free to go. I'm willing to do so. Let me be deemed the hateful cause of all and suffer rather than my people fall. The prize, the beauteous prize, I will resign, so dearly valued and so justly mine. But since for the common good I yield the fair, I give up this beautiful girl, my private loss let grateful Greece repair. Nor unrewarded let your prince complain that he alone has fought and bled in vain. So what Agamemnon says is, Calchas accuses me of being the cause of this trouble. First of all, I'm a king. I have the right to take captives in war. That's my right. That's just. I'm not doing anything wrong. Secondly, this captive girl is extremely beautiful and valuable to me, and therefore I want to keep her. However, even though I was just in taking her, even though she is very valuable, I am willing to let her go in order to please the gods and protect my people. So Agamemnon sounds good here. He sounds like he's acknowledging his need to fix this, and he's willing to do so. So Agamemnon sounds good. But then at the end, he introduces one condition. He says, I will let her go, but here's what has to be done. The Greeks, my subjects, have to replace her. So I'm willing to let her go to bring an end to this plague, but I demand that she be replaced, that someone else, that the Greek people offer me a replacement for her, because it's not right that I, the king, should lead the army into battle and then not be able to take a prize for that battle. That would not be just. So the Greeks should repay me by giving me a replacement for her, and I will let her go. That's what Agamemnon says. And that sounds pretty good. That doesn't sound bad. Agamemnon agrees and says, one condition, if I let her go, I believe that the people should provide me with a replacement. In other words, somebody's got to give up their prize to repay me for giving up my prize. Okay, that's what he says there. Well, that does not please Achilles. We then read Achilles replies, insatiate king. That insatiate means never satisfied. Insatiate king, Achilles thus replies, fond of power, but fonder of the prize. Wouldst thou, the Greeks, their lawful prey should yield, the due reward of many a well-fought field? In other words, Achilles says, look, you're the king. You didn't fight in battle. You didn't risk your life to win these battles. These Greeks, they risked their lives. Many of them lost sons and friends in battle. These are their prizes for risking their life in battle for your sake. Now you're going to take away from your soldiers one of their prizes in order to repay yourself when you already have everything? Insatiate king. So Achilles complains about Agamemnon. And we're going to finish up this last part and then we'll wrap up here. The spoils of cities razed, that means destroyed or burned down, the spoils of cities razed and warriors slain, we share, the people, we the soldiers share with justice, as with toil we gain. But to resume whate'er thy avarice, thy greed craves, that trick of tyrants may be borne by slaves, yet if our chief for plunder only fight, the spoils of Iliad, that's Troy, shall thy loss requite. Whene'er by Jove's decree our conquering powers shall humble to the dust her lofty towers. So what Achilles says here in reply to Agamemnon is, you're being ridiculous. You're greedy and never satisfied, and you're going to make your soldiers who risk their lives for your sake pay you with their prize. He says, if we continue to fight and we conquer Troy and take over Troy, won't you get enough reward when we conquer Troy to be content to just end this plague, let this girl go and leave your soldiers alone? Do you really need to take from them a replacement when you're about to conquer Troy? Obviously, you're going to have plenty of reward. So give us a break. Send this girl away, get rid of this plague, and let's continue on our mission and go continue this fight against Troy. And when we conquer it, you can take all the plunder you want from the defeated city. So that's Achilles' argument, his response to Agamemnon. All right. So you can see how much stuff is in this reading. And that's why when you're doing it by yourself the first time, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to read these ancient poems just because there's so much information packed into these stories. But hopefully going through it like this helps. And I know that it's very slow when we go through it like this. May be boring to go through it like this, but once you start to get used to all of this information and learn the story and learn the history and learn what to pay attention to and how to understand these things, it'll allow you to get faster and faster at it. So we'll go slow for a while, and then we'll get to a point where you really don't need me to explain things anymore, and that's my goal. So anyway, we've covered this next phase of this first book, where after the plague is, after the prayer of the priest of Apollo, Apollo unleashes this plague. Achilles is then inspired by Juno to call the Greeks together to try to figure out what's going on. A prophet named Calchas stands up and answers the question and says, Agamemnon is the cause of this plague because he took the priest's daughter and he needs to release her. Agamemnon responds to this prophet by, just telling him that he hates him and all he ever does is say bad things about the king. But Agamemnon says he's willing to let Chrysia go, but he believes that the Greeks should replace her. Achilles rises up and says, "Oh, are you kidding me? You're going to take, the spoils, the rewards of your poor soldiers here who are risking their life, so you don't have to miss out on one prize. You're about to conquer a whole city. Give us a break." So Achilles opposes Agamemnon. And what we're starting to see here, pay attention to this, we're starting to see this fight develop between Agamemnon and Achilles. Remember from the beginning, that's the cause of the trouble. Agamemnon and Achilles get into a fight. We don't see that fight yet. The fight hasn't started yet, but we see them starting to disagree on this issue of how to respond to Agamemnon taking this daughter of the priest of Apollo. Agamemnon says one thing, Achilles disagrees, and we're just beginning to see the disagreement develop as they get into this argument with each other. And in our next lesson or two, we'll see exactly what happens and what they fight about. So I hope that's helpful. We're moving slowly through book one, just trying to cover, I think I've covered every detail that we've come across in the reading. So hopefully that's helpful. It might be too much information for you to take in all at once, but you can rewatch the video if you want to. So with that, I'll say I'm done for today's class. And if you have any questions or anything, I can hang out and answer those questions. Otherwise, you're free to go, okay? So I'm going to move from video and audio over to the chat room. Like I said, you're free to go if you have no questions. Otherwise, ask away and I'll answer questions as long as you keep writing them. So for those of you who leave, take care. I'll see you next time. And for those of you to stay, I'll be in the chat. So even though I'm off video, I'm still here just on the chat. All right. God bless everybody.